To start our air conditioning troubleshooting, we need to know what's happening inside of our system. Our manifold gauge set is the best tool we have for checking the pressures in our system and to see what it's producing. To get started, let's hook up our gauge set. We hook them up to the engine. We start the engine, run it at a fast idle, turn the thermostatic switch to maximum cold, and the blower fan to maximum speed. If the refrigerant pressures are correct and the AC system is functioning correctly, you will see gauge readings from 18 to 38 pounds per square inch, and on the low side, we'll see 150 to 320 pounds per square inch on the high side. You might ask, why such a spread between the pressures on each side? This spread is due to the potential variables in the ambient air temperature. In other words, how hot or how cold is your shop? The ideal shop temperature is 70 degrees. If your system is working correctly, you will see a more narrow range of gauge readings like 29 pounds per square inch on the low side and 215 pounds per square inch on the high side. If you see a large difference between the low side and high side pressures, as an example that I just mentioned, that's 186 degrees per square inch between the low and high side. You can then presume that the compressor is working well. Any compressor that can give you a nice spread between the low and the high side is functioning properly. Being careful not to come into contact with any of the engine moving parts, you can also use your hands to do a quick check of the system temperatures. The low side, which is the larger hose or pipe, will be sweating and cold, and the high side, which is the smaller hose or pipe, will be hot to the touch. Now that we know what the normal readings are, let's explore what causes incorrect readings. Things that'll affect the low side gauge readings are higher humidity, which lowers the efficiency of the system, the refrigerant charge level, if it's undercharged or overcharged, will get outside the normal range readings on our gauges. An old expansion valve, which may not be opening completely, or a plugged screen on an orifice tube will give us lower than normal gauge readings. Things that affect the high side gauge readings are, again, the refrigerant charge for the same reasons we just mentioned. Anything that restricts the flow of air through the fins of the condenser on the outside, or the flow of the refrigerant on the inside the tubes of the condenser, will also give us higher than normal readings. If our high and low side pressure readings are correct, but we notice that the clutch is cycling on and off, an often overlooked part of the AC system is the thermostatic switch. That's the lever or knob in the dash which can be set to the temperature level desired by the driver. If this has malfunctioned, the compressor clutch will cycle on and off rapidly or not come on at all. Let's look at 4 problems that can cause refrigerant overcharges on our gauge set. You may be asking, how is refrigerant overcharge possible? This can be caused by a couple different methods. For an example, Bubba, the owner-operator, knows he has a small air conditioning leak. Instead of getting the leak fixed, he stops once a week to top off his refrigerant or installs some himself. Another reason is the shop, who does air conditioning repairs kind of on the side and does not own a recovery machine or a scale, or does not know the correct amount of refrigerant the system requires, they guess as to how much to install. This will result in a refrigerant overcharge. Overcharge gauge readings can be in the neighborhood of 43 pounds per square inch on the low side and 320 pounds per square inch on the high side. Some other signs to look for on the system: the discharge air from the vents on the dash will be coming out warm. You will not see any bubbles in the sight glass on the dryer if equipped. To correct a refrigerant overcharge, remember the most likely reason it is overcharged is because there's a leak and somebody's been continually putting air conditioning refrigerant in there to solve the leak. Leak test the system. You can do this with an electronic leak detector, ultraviolet light, or the soapy bubbles. All these will work fine. Recover and recycle all the refrigerant. By the way, this is a good time to replace your filter dryer. Evacuate the system, in other words, vacuum it down for 60 to 90 minutes. Charge it to the proper levels. Then check the system for correct performance. Please note, there are other circumstances which can cause higher than normal gauge readings, which we'll cover in the next few minutes. Another cause of higher than normal gauge readings would be airflow restricted at the condenser. A condenser which has the coolant fins that are plugged up with dirt, love bugs, or where the fins have been damaged will not allow the correct airflow to remove the heat needed to condense the refrigerant from a vapor to a liquid. Improper fan clutch operation will also cause higher than normal gauge readings. A malfunctioning cooling fan switch or the fan controller will cause higher than normal gauge readings also. To correct these conditions, first we need to verify that the refrigerant level is correct. This usually means recovering and recycling the system to the factory settings. Clean and straighten the fins or replace the condenser. Diagnose the clutch fan operation to make sure it is functioning correctly. If equipped, check the electronic condenser fan for its operation. Test fan electrical circuits and switches, then you can confirm the system's performance. A third cause of higher than normal gauge readings can be an expansion valve which is stuck in the wide open position. Symptoms for this would include warm discharge air from the dash vents, excessive moisture or frost on the low side pipes or hoses. The inlet and outlet pipes are the same temperature. If any of these exist, we have a situation where the expansion valve is stuck open. To correct it, we need to check the heat sensing tube for proper installation. The capillary tube must have the sensing bulb secured to the outgoing line of the evaporator with cork insulating tape. If using a block type valve, the valve may be stuck in the open position due to a broken valve spring or leak in the diaphragm. This valve will need to be replaced. As with any time you have the system open, replace the receiver dryer. If you have an orifice tube system, this tube will need to be replaced. Next, evacuate the system for 60 to 90 minutes. Charge the system to the proper level. Check the system's performance. A fourth cause for higher than normal gauge readings would be air in the system. This is mainly caused by not running a complete vacuum of the system before installing the refrigerant. Again, the symptoms would include discharge air at the vents will be running warm, excessive bubbles in the sight glass in the dryer, the low side pipe or hoses will be warm to the touch. To correct this problem, recover and recycle the refrigerant from the system. Check the compressor for proper oil level and possible oil contamination. Replace the filter dryer. Evacuate, which means vacuum out the system for 60 to 90 minutes. Charge the system to the factory settings. Check the system for proper performance. Sometimes moisture can appear in the system, and it will appear as a normal or below normal side reading and a normal or higher than normal high side reading. The low side may temporarily drop into a vacuum, then jump back to normal. This is due to the moisture moving through the system and freezing at the expansion valve orifice opening in the expansion valve, then melting and allowing refrigerant to move freely. When we look for symptoms, we'll see again that the discharge air this time will be cool or cold. The moisture indicator in the receiver dryer will be pink or white in color. To correct this moisture in the system problem, we have to recover and recycle refrigerant, replace the filter dryer, or if you have an orifice tube, replace it and the accumulator, replace the expansion valve, evacuate the system for 60 to 90 minutes, then check your system for correct performance. A high side restriction can be caused by damaged rubber hose. The inner liner can be bruised or torn, or the full flow style condenser can be restricted by debris from a failing compressor. Our symptoms would be warm discharge air at the dash vents, or a sudden drop in temperature at the point of the restriction. In other words, you could take a temp gun and find a cold spot in the condenser at the point of the restriction. To correct this high side restriction problem, recover and recycle the refrigerant, repair or replace the restricted component, replace the filter dryer, and if it has an orifice tube, replace that. Evacuate the system for 60 to 90 minutes, charge the system to the factory levels, and then check the system for proper performance. A low refrigerant charge is the #1 cause of failure in an air conditioning system. Your gauges will read at or below 11 pounds per square inch on the low side and 121 pounds per square inch or below on the high side. Again, your hoses need to be checked. Every fitting needs to be checked. The compressor clutch seal needs to be checked. Look for points of moisture or oil contamination. And again, when we check the system, we can use an electronic leak detector, we can use soapy bubbles, or we can use the ultraviolet. Once we've found our problem, we need to correct the leak, recover and recycle the refrigerant. We need to replace the dryer. If it has an orifice tube and accumulator, replace those. Evacuate the system for 60 to 90 minutes. Hold that vacuum for 10 minutes to make sure the gauge remains in the vacuum setting. If it doesn't, you still have another leak and need to correct that. Then charge the system to the factory levels. Leak test the system one more time, then do a performance test on the system. If you'll notice, in all the previous diagnostics that we've done, we've always had a pretty strong gap between the low and the high side pressures. On the last one, where we had a low refrigerant charge, we still had 11 psi or less on the low side and 121 on the high side. When we have a malfunctioning compressor, it'll be evident because you'll see readings that are high on the low side and low on the high side. In fact, they may be the same pounds per square inch readings. What that's telling us is the compressor is not working at all inside, or we have damaged reed valves. Some of the symptoms we'll be looking for, again, the air coming out of the dash vents will be warm. The compressor will be noisy in operation. Some of the evidence of a compressor locking up will manifest as discoloration of the clutch facings due to its slipping. Fluttering gauge needles can be caused by one or more cracked or broken reed valves in the compressor. Low or no oil in the compressor, remembering that we need to have 10 ounces in the rotary style and 14 ounces in the upright style. These are the factory fill levels. To correct a malfunctioning compressor, recover and recycle the refrigerant, flush the system. Note that a full flow, the manifold style condenser cannot be flushed, and this must be replaced if the compressor has locked up. Next, replace the expansion valve, or if it has an orifice tube, replace that. Replace the receiver dryer, or if it has an accumulator, replace that. Replace the compressor. Evacuate the system for 60 to 90 minutes. If the system has been flushed, replace the correct amount of oils for the components that you have flushed. Recharge the system to the factory settings, then check your system for proper performance. Poor refrigerant circulation. This can be caused by partial or complete restrictions at the dryer, expansion valve, orifice tube, or the evaporator. This can happen if a poorly designed dryer has been used. A dryer which does not have the multi-layer design with a large spring holding the disc firmly into place. Symptoms of this problem may include warm to cool discharge air coming from the dash vents, frost on the tubes from the receiver dryer to the evaporator, or frost on the expansion valve. Some of the things we can do to correct this are, first of all, recover and recycle the refrigerant. Flush the system. Remember to replace the oil in the components that you flushed and that you cannot flush through the full flow style condenser. Replace the receiver dryer or the accumulator and orifice tube if so equipped. Evacuate the system for 60 to 90 minutes. Charge the system to the factory settings, and then check the system for correct performance.